Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Enology webinar series, or welcome back to our series. My name is Dr. Andrea Botezatu. I'm assistant professor and Enology extension specialist with Texas A&M University, Texas Agrilife Extension Services. And the webinar today will focus on key steps of rosé winemaking. Our presenter today is Eglantine Chauffour of Enartis, USA. Eglantine is a technical winemaker at Enartis and is responsible for research projects, technical support, and consulting services for the wine industry. She holds a double master's degree in viticulture, enology, and agronomic engineering from Montpellier Agro in France. And her international background with previous work experience in France, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States gives Eglantine a uniquely broad view of wine and the processes it takes to make a wine of quality. Now, before we begin, I would like to cover a little bit of housekeeping. This presentation will be about 50 minutes long, and we have about 10 minutes at the end of it for questions and answers. I would like to ask you to save the questions and answers for that time at the end of the presentation. Also, this presentation is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. So, without further ado, Eglantine, thank you very much for being with us today. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Joanna. Can everybody hear me?
I can.
Okay, so thank you, Joanna, for this introduction and for asking me to come and speak about rosé, which is one of my favorite topics. Rosé winemaking is one of the most complex and technologic wine to make, which explain why we want to pay special attention to this style of wine. We are dealing with the challenges of white wine with oxidation, aromatic production, keeping the freshness, and we are dealing with the challenges of red wine concerning the color, the phenolic content, the extraction of this compound. So basically, we have both challenges that we have to put all together. Why are we talking about rosé? Is mainly because consumers love it. The production, the consumption, and the importation in USA is growing every year. USA is right now the third producer of rosé wine. The first producer is France with leadership in Provence. And so today I'm gonna talk mainly about, I would focus on Provençal style because that's the leader in terms of rosé winemaking around the world, but as well I come from Provence, so that's the style that I'm the most familiar with. Since the rosé wine are booming, the requests of the customers are growing, but as well as the expectation of the consumer are growing too. So we have to increase the production, but we have to increase the quality as well. So when we talk about rosé, what are we actually expecting? What are we talking about? We are talking about a color, obviously. So rosé is the name of the color. Pink, it means pink in French, which in reality can be a very wide range of color. As you can see on the screen, you can see the repartition of color in rosé wine in this pie. You see that it goes all around the place, basically. And then you can see here that it can go from very, very light, almost white wine, to very, very dark, almost red wine. That's fine. The most thing that matters is that we are coherent. So if we have a very light color, when you see a very light color, you're expecting aromas to be more apricot, maybe floral, peach, but a color that goes with the aroma. if you see something very dark and very pink, usually you're expecting more strawberry, raspberry, red fruit type of aromas. That's a very, very interesting concept, and I think that's the key point of making good wine is to actually start with a coherent wine. In rosé, since the color is very important, it's actually even more important. When in everyday life, for everything we drink or we eat, the first thing we do is look at the color, and then we smell to check, in fact, that the smell is what we are expecting, seeing the color of the wine or food. So that would be the same with rosé, very important. We did some study before working in USA, I worked in a research center making research on rosé wine, and we were making some studies of how the color can impact the perception of the consumer. And the same wine with alimentary food colorant. So we had a normal rosé, a rosé where we put a little taint of yellow, and a rosé that we put more red. Everybody said that the three wines were different, and the one a little bit more orange was smelling apricot and peach. The one a little bit more red was smelling strawberry and raspberry. So very, very important to think that the color has to be coherent with the aromas. But a good rosé is not only about color and aromas. We actually want a balanced mouthfeel. So nice to have a good color. That's the first step. That's what the consumer is gonna, that's what will orientate the choice of the consumer on a shelf, the color. That's why he takes it, then he smells it, and he is happy because the smell, the aromas are answering his expectation, seeing the color. Then he tastes, and the taste is gonna make his experience. If the mouthfeel is balanced, the wine is gonna be perfect, very good, he will go back. If the mouthfeel is not balanced, he will be disappointed. So very important to work on the three components and to make it as a coherence. Then, how do we make rosé? There is different type of process to make rosé. So how do we, today obviously we are gonna talk about how to control the color, how to control the aromas, and how to make the best mouthfeel you can. But obviously we have to think there is different way to produce rosé. In reality, there is 3 ways, even if I like to think it's only 2. We can make rosé in a saignée way, which means you have a tank of red, you drain your tank, you take this juice and you vinify this juice as a white wine. This approach is usually having particular challenges because this approach is to make rosé as a side product. So the first goal is to concentrate your red to make a very nice red that is with a lot of extraction, a lot of polyphenol, a lot of color. So you remove some juice to increase the surface contact skin juice in your red, and this juice is going to be rosé. It happens that this juice, these grapes, has been picked for red wine, so they are higher Brix, lower acidity, so higher pH, and usually more ripe type of aromas. As well, this type of juices very often lack of polysaccharides, so they lack of mouthfeel and roundness and balance. So when you make wine from rosé, very important to work on the mouthfeel. Then obviously the aromas are not going to be an issue because very often wine from saignée are very strong in aromatic compounds, especially if you choose a yeast that produce a lot of aromas. So no problem on the aromas, but the mouthfeel is very important to work on. The other process that is, I would say, my favorite and the most qualitative process, the most noble process to make rosé, and which is what we use in Provence, is a direct press. So we pick grapes for rosé. We actually manage the vineyard for rosé. We pick grape for rosé. And then we press them and we process the entire juice as a white wine. This will give you the most of your grapes. This is how you will extract the most of the potential of your grapes, and that's how you will produce more qualitative rosé. But I will talk about these two. Obviously, there is a last way to make rosé, which I don't completely agree with, would be to blend red and white. So you put 1 bucket of red wine in a tank of white wine, and you have rosé, some rosé. This is a strategy that can be done in sparkling wine. If you do it before tirage, that's commonly done. That's only them are allowed to do it. So let's go a little bit more into the specificities of rosé winemaking and a little bit more in the technical part. The most important part to manage in rosé is the pre-fermentation steps. So from picking to clarification of the juice, that's gonna be very important, and that's where a lot of things can happen, and that's where you can actually control your quality. Then oxygen management is gonna be very, very important. Oxygen is the strongest enemy, or the worst enemy in rosé winemaking, because you get the oxidation of aromas, you get the oxidation of phenolic compounds, you get the oxidation of color, you lose the freshness, and you lose the nice fruity aromas. So basically with oxidation, you make a wine that is not visually attractive, not aromatically attractive, and not mouthfeel attractive. So you lose the key point of making a good rosé. So we are going to focus on oxygen management on the last part of the presentation. Aromatic production, this part is going to be pretty easy. That's all done during extraction of the grapes and fermentation. Balanced mouthfeel, very important, especially for saignée type of rosé. And usually a rosé wine has to be ready within the year. So all this process is actually pretty fast. You harvest, let's say in September, August, September, and in Provence at least, they harvest August, September, and then they release their wine in February. So in reality, it's only half year where you want to make the wine, protect the wine against oxidation, work on the mouthfeel, stabilize your wine. Stability is an important step in rosé winemaking, and sell it. So we are gonna see, so there is no place for mistake, basically. So the first step is gonna be the harvest. You want to think rosé from the vineyard. That's the optimal situation. Obviously, it doesn't happen when you make a saignée, but it could happen if you make a direct press. So vineyard management will be another approach if you want to make rosé, because we are not looking at color, but we are looking mainly at aromas, and we are looking at acidity. So the harvest indicators when we think rosé are going to be obviously bricks, but our target is usually 21, 22. We don't really want to try to water it back. If it's possible, it's better to not do it. So low bricks, but the most important is actually managing the pH, the TA, and the malic acid. Malic acid is the best indicator in rosé. When your malic acid starts to drop, it means that you are losing acidity, which means it's time to pick. So then sensory evaluation and extractability can be another approach. So if your bricks are good, your malic acid is still good, you can think about tasting the grapes and look at the extractability of the color when you press the skin between your two fingers. So these are three big steps. They are obviously good for every type of grapes, but I would say that when you make rosé, you want to focus on malic acid. Then the requirements at harvest, very important to be fast because you can limit oxidation in this case. You don't want to let your grapes hanging in their juice for long, and as cold as possible. It happened that with a lot of studies between hand harvesting and machine picking, nowadays harvest machines are very, very qualitative, so they can be very gentle and you can regulate harvest picking in a very nice way. If you harvest by machine, it allows you to harvest at night, so when it's cold, and very fast, which is actually answering the requirements to make rosé. So it ends up that harvest machine is actually considered as qualitative because you can go fast and you can go cold. So just a little part on some trend in varieties, because obviously depending the variety we are dealing with, we are not going to work the same way in the cellar. So this would be the top varieties that we have to make rosé. I would be interested to see actually which variety you are working with. So maybe when we do a question answer, we can try to speak about the different varieties. These are the ones that I work the most in France. So the Grenache is the most common. Grenache is a variety that gives you a very light intensity in color and very orangey salmon type of color because Grenache is very sensitive to oxidation. Cinsault has a nice pink color, not too sensitive to oxidation, not so many aromas, but very good in mouthfeel. Syrah would be a variety that is very interesting for its color because it's very dark, very stable color, very bright, not easily to oxidize, and it brings a lot of spice. Then we have the Mourvèdre that is very typical, that is here to give some balance and some mouthfeel, but as well a lot of spice and stiols, aromas. And then, I mean, we have a lot of different varieties. I'm not going to go through all of them. It would take too long, but this would be the main one that we worked on in Provence. So that's why I have this result. But now, obviously, since I'm in USA, I could add some few lines on other varieties. But basically knowing the type, if it's a variety that is going to give you some fruity, citrusy, or spicy aromas, if it's a variety that is going to give you mouthfeel or not, and how sensitive to oxidation is this variety, these three questions are going to help you managing your approach and your winemaking approach. So the second step, now we harvest our grapes, we choose a variety, we did our job in maturity control. We are happy about this. We bring the grapes into the cellar. We need to extract all the aromas, all the polysaccharide and the polyphenols that we want. That's where we are building the wine potential. Because as soon as we press the grapes, these grapes are not going to be kept. They are usually going in the trash or going in the vineyard as fertilizer, or there is another way to recycle the skins, but they are definitely not going back into this wine. So we need to extract everything we can and everything we want. It happened that to extract, there is a lot of these compounds that are present in the skin. So as you can see here, the terpenes, the norisoprenol, the thiols, these are all varietal aromatic compounds that they are present in the skin. And unfortunately for us, this picture here, I don't know if you can see the picture, my mouse, but this picture here is representing a cell wall, the cell walls of the skin. So you imagine one molecule from inside to outside to go out. It's basically a nightmare. This is a huge net of cellulose, hemicellulose, glucans, pectins, a lot of different huge polysaccharides that make this spider net that makes the molecule almost impossible to cross. So all the little one will, but then what about the bigger molecules? Some thiols are attached to some sugar, so they become glycosylated and pretty big molecules that can't cross these walls if you don't help. So how can you help? Obviously, the pressing is going to help because you are degrading these walls. Skin contact, if you increase the skin contact, you help, and if you crush your grapes, it's going to help as well. But something that is very, very commonly used in everywhere that we make rosé, but especially in Provence, is enzyme. So by using enzyme, you actually can cut this net, make the net a little bit looser, and let the molecules, aromatic molecule, going through without extending too much the skin contact, which allows you to control better oxidation, and without getting too hard on the pressing cycles, which as well increase the extraction of potassium and make the wine more turbid, which you don't want to. So think about enzyme for this. There is another reason why people use enzyme is that you increase the yield at the press. So you can have 6 to 9% more yield, more juice at the pressing time, which we are not talking about making more and more and more juice, but this can be very beneficial to keep your press in a gentle side. So you actually increase your free range juice and your first presses, but then you can cut a little bit bigger your hard press and separate these parts. So you don't keep the less qualitative. You will have more tannin and more polysaccharide extraction because they are bigger molecules and need to go through these walls. You will have more aromatic expression, more balance because you have more polysaccharide, tannin, and aromatic. So it gives wine more complex, more qualitative. But some 2 points that are really important as well is you increase your filtrability. So you limit issues down the road. Remember that the full process has to be fast. You don't really want to deal with filtrability issue when you're ready to bottle. So improving your filtrability can be a very beneficial point since it's a side effect of the enzyme. And then if you use an enzyme with a protease activity such as RMP, you will have less bentonite needed to stabilize for protein. So that's a strategy to reduce the amount of bentonite you need, so you reduce the impact of the bentonite on your wine, but you are still stabilizing your protein. Using RMP, we realize that you can limit 20 to 30% of bentonite, the dosage of bentonite you use. So very, very important. If there is one thing, one enological product that you want to think about in making rosé is actually extraction enzyme. They are applied on grapes usually at crushing or desteaming or inside when you add the grapes into the press. So the pressing cycle, very important as well. So pressing cycle is has to be gentle. You want to limit the rotations and you want to separate the juices. Gentle because you want a really smooth extraction. You don't want to heat your grapes and extract all the bitter tannins, and you don't want to extract too much color as well. You definitely don't want to crush any seeds. Limit the rotation. That's mainly to avoid the potassium extraction. It's very important to limit them because you limit the potassium, so you don't have really spike in pH and an acidity that is very hard to manage, and a buffer capacity very, very low, so you can't, any acid you put, nothing happen. And you don't want to have too much turbidity, because then you have to clarify your juice just after. So if you can avoid to have too many lees, it's better. Separate the juice. This means basically you make your gentle program for your heart of cuvée for the rosé, and then you can just extract everything you can, and you separate this part by doing rotation, doing big inflation, like big pressure, you low down the membrane, you rotate, big pressure, you low down, you rotate. And this can be on the side and treated differently. So if you look at these two type of cycle, basically I'm talking about a crescendo cycle, or like what they use in sparkling wine. So you increase slowly by plateau your pressure until the flow of juice is very low, and this you can deflate, rotate, and then re-inflate the membrane. And when you arrive towards the end and you separate, you can go as a red press cycle, which is you go at 1.8 or 2 bars of pressure for a few minutes, you deflate, you rotate, you go 1.8, 2 bar for minutes, and you deflate, you rotate. So very commonly people cut the press of the cuvée around 0.8 to 1 bar, and then it becomes hard press. And here you have the repartition, so this would be in a perfect world. It's not always doable, I know, but sometimes it can be. So your bean juice, when you receive your grapes, this juice in which your berries are floating is usually not qualitative at all. This could be considered as 5% of your total volume. This juice is, you imagine that your berries has been floating in this juice. This juice is usually hot, it's full of microbes. It's actually cleaning the berries, so it's full of all the wax that was on the berries. So high in lipids, which are toxic for the yeast and not qualitative. And as well, usually there is some leaves and some insect and some pieces of stems. So all this juice is pretty green. And you have pesticides concentration in this juice. So this is not most qualitative. If you can set it apart, it's better. Then you start to have your free run, your first press, and then we are talking about the hard press. The hard press and the bean juice can both of them be combined together. And as you can see, I'm missing like 5% in this process. So you can add 5% in the first presses or this part, so it stay in your cuvée. But your bean juice and your hard press can be blended together in another tank, and we will treat it in a different way, which I'm arriving to this part, clarification. So now we have to clean the juice to make it ready to ferment. As I was telling you, the pre-fermentation steps are the most important. That's why it's very long. But so when we arrive to at the end of the press, so we have two tanks, our qualitative juice and then the bean juice with the hard press juice blended together. The objective on these two juice is to be clean, to have a lower NTU. We are usually targeting between 100 and 200 NTU in terms of rosé winemaking. And you, again, want to be fast, so you need a fast settling time because you want to limit oxidation. How do we do this? We are going to use cold settling or flotation. Flotation is even faster, so this can be very good. Enzyme to help settling down. If you used enzyme before on the grapes to extract, you don't really need to use enzyme later. But again, some varieties are a little bit more rich in pectin and will need higher dosage of pectinase. And the example would be the Cinsault, that is really hard to settle. And then fining agents, that's the step that you can correct your juice. Fining agents are usually used if the juice got a little bit of oxidation, or if the juice, if the grapes were not completely healthy and some botrytis were present, and the tank of press and bean juice. So here you have a list of fining agents, but basically for the bean juice, and when we are talking about lighter fold and very gentle fining agent, we can go on the Clarilay-CHEM or Protoclar, Clarilay-SP. These are fining agents that are very gentle. Clarilay-SP contain bentonite, so you start to help stabilizing your protein at the juice stage. And then when we talk about hard presses that are usually not clean and high in color, we can start to use carbon. And in this case, our Renault Black Perlage is a very good carbon to use, since it helps, it's in pellet form, so you don't blow carbons everywhere. So depending the juice you have, you are gonna think about a different type of fining. That's as well the time that you can manage your acidity and your Brix level if you need to. If we are talking about a saignée type of winemaking, you want to do this juice clarification as well. So you will need enzyme to settle, and you want to be fast because usually it's warm. So enzyme to settle, we have Zimeres as enzyme just to settle. There is nothing else to extract in the saignée juice because your grapes are not present anymore, so you don't need an extraction enzyme. And a fining agent to clean this juice. The saignée juice is a bean juice, so you want to think about removing pesticide, removing the wax, and cleaning all this green of flavor. So now we did the settling, we are ready for fermentation. Fermentation, the main thing that is going to happen during fermentation is where you produce your aromas, or you reveal your aromas. You extract a lot from the grapes that you produce them in the vineyard, but they were aromatic precursors. Now we are talking about production, revelation of these aromas. And all this is on the yeast and the yeast nutrition. When I talk about oxygen management, when we start to ferment, there is no need to be scared of oxygen anymore. That's the only part of the winemaking process that doesn't need specific protection against oxidation, because the yeast produce CO2, so it's protected already, and then the yeast needs oxygen, so the yeast will eat the oxygen before the wine consumes it. So we are talking about high protection on the juice stage, and you will see we talk about high protection on the wine stage, but during fermentation, it's all fine with oxygen. So which parameter can be fine-tuned and adjust to manage your aromatic profile and orientate your aromatic profile? Obviously, you can choose a yeast. There is different yeast that can have different enzymatic activities and will express some precursors. So if you want to express thiols, for example, that thiols are Sauvignon Blanc type of aromas, but very citrusy, very grapefruit, cassis, box tree type of aromas, you need a yeast that has the enzymatic activity to release these thiols, which is a beta lyase, cysteine beta lyase. So just ask your supplier of yeast to understand which yeast does what, because you can express thiols, but you can express noesoprenoids or terpenes. There are different enzymatic activity, and you can as well express some amino acids to produce more esters. So in very neutral grape variety, we want to produce aromas. There is no varietal aromas. In this case, we are working in a yeast with a yeast that can produce esters. The second point is the yeast nutrition. Again, you can help the yeast to produce more aromas by giving nutrients that are rich in amino acids to produce these aromas. So we are enriching the must or the juice into aromatic precursors for ester production. Then you have the turbidity. So very low turbidity will below 50 NTU would be too low, and this would need to be adjusted because you might have very low varietal aromas in this. If you're around 100 NTU, we focus on the ester production, which means banana, strawberry, pear, apple, this type of aromas. Then if you're higher than 100, I put from 100 to 400, but 400 would be too much. Remember that 200 is usually the maximum target. You are going to express more varietal aromas. So thiols, noisoprenol. Temperature range. If you go very low in temperature, that's where the ester production is pushed or is favored. So you will produce more of these banana, strawberry, pear, apple aromas. If you're a little bit higher, and when I say higher in temperature, I'm talking about the initial part of the fermentation, but then at the end of the fermentation, we still want to go a little bit lower. We are more on the complexity, more fruity, and more varietal. So yeast nutrition, because this is very important. So as you saw here, sorry. Okay, here the yeast nutrition can help you managing your aromatic profile, but as well, one of the worst things that can happen in winemaking in general, but especially in rosé, because remember that you have to produce, it's a really fast process. You want to keep freshness and you want to keep nice color, no oxidation. Worst thing that can happen would be a stuck fermentation. So very important to understand nutritional needs of the yeast and make sure the yeast has enough. Yeast needs nitrogen, fatty acid and sterol, thiamine, so vitamin, and minerals. More or less like us. It's a normal diet. She needs a balanced diet. And she needs as well some oxygen, 5 to 10 milligrams per liter during alcoholic fermentation, which usually, so if you have a micro-ox unit and you can measure, that's great, or a pulse machine, you can inject some pulse of air. Otherwise, just pump overs, aerated pump overs. In rosé, but in white as well, it can be very interesting to do aerated pump overs 1 or 2 times during fermentation, during the peak of fermentation. So usually the vitamins is already, all these compounds are naturally present in the grapes. Then not every grapes has enough to satisfy all the yeast needs. So it's very important to know what you have in your grapes originally, which means measure your YAN, yeast assimilable nitrogen, before. If your grapes are touched by botrytis, contaminated by botrytis, they might lack on thiamines. So this can be very important to supplement, and usually rehydration nutrients or complex, yeast amino acid nutrients contain thiamine. So let's focus on nitrogen. There is 2 types of nitrogen that the yeast can assimilate. Inorganic nitrogen, which is ammonia. I compare it as the donut of the yeast, the fast food of the yeast. That's the yeast love it. The yeast is going to take it, assimilate it, and use it as it is. If you give too much, she doesn't know what to do because she can't store it somewhere. So she's going to take it, produce other cells, and then reject it, which means that if you put too much ammonia, that's especially at the beginning of the fermentation, that's where you have all this big spike of heat and speed. The yeast produce a lot of cells and a lot of heat, and then they actually starve themselves because they don't have any food to eat later down the road, and they are usually not very well done because they made too many cells from one cell. So, but it's a favorite food of the yeast. As a kid, it's a fast food. Organic nitrogen, this would be amino acids. As you can see here, they are much bigger molecule, much more complex. I like to assimilate them to vegetables or gastronomic meal, let's say. So the yeast doesn't like it as a favorite food, but she's going to eat it no matter what. It happened that this type of nitrogen is very qualitative for the yeast. The yeast can store it in the vacuole and use it slowly as she needs. So that's very qualitative. And as well, they are the building blocks of protein. So yeast use nitrogen to build protein. If yeast use ammonia, she needs to find a carbon skeleton somewhere to put the nitrogen on it, build an amino acid, and use this amino acid to build the protein. If you give the amino acid as it is, it's already done. So that's already a good step. It happened that because they are bigger molecule, they don't use the same pathway to come in to be transported in the cell. So ammonia can diffuse gradually within the cell. So as soon as you have ammonia outside, you have ammonia inside the cell. It goes like this as a gradient. Amino acids needs an active transport, as you can see here, which means it needs energy. So the yeast will use amino acid only when the yeast is new, fresh, full of energy, and if there is no ammonia. Because if you have ammonia next to it, she's going to prefer this one. It happens that when the yeast is stressed, and for example, when there is alcohol or there is a temperature shock, or if the yeast is stressed, her priority is to survive, not to eat. So this transporter is going to shut down as soon as there is too much alcohol. So to conclude this part, basically, what you want to do is to force your yeast to use amino acids when she can. So at inoculation, you want to use nutrients that are rich in amino acids, naturally present in the grapes. So grapes would be 70% amino acids, 30% ammonia. So already there is this ratio. But then you want to supplement in amino acids with rehydration nutrients or a nutrient that you can add just after inoculation. And then when you are around a third of the fermentation, when the yeast needs more energy, but she cannot assimilate amino acid anymore, you can give her the donut. Like now you're running the marathon, you eat a big meal before, so you are prepared, and then at one point, you need a little bit of new energy to finish it. That's when you go with your ammonia, which is DAP or Nutrifirm Advance. And then you have to know that there is some amino acid that can actually bring some other, in addition to nitrogen, like the yeast can cut them down and produce some esters, so they can be precursors of aromas. So this would be how to produce aromatic compounds. Then if we look at focusing on oxygen management, because I told you, very important to manage oxygen. Yeah. Except during fermentation. So we just talk about the fermentation, we talk about how to deal with aromas, now how to not screw up all these aromas, how to manage oxygen. There is something you need to know. So there is two types of oxidations, enzymatic oxidation and the chemical oxidation. Enzymatic oxidation happens in juice. From as soon as you pick the grapes and there is a juice that goes out and is in contact with the air, there is oxidation, enzymatic oxidation. They can oxidize phenol and polyphenol, and it becomes brown and you lose the color, but as well, you can have some oxidation of lipids and linoleic acids that will become bitter and increase the vegetable or veggies character. We are talking about lacase, PPO, lacase when it's botrytis, PPO in every grapes. For the lipids, we are talking about lipoxygenase. This is less common, but it can happen. So how are we going to protect this? We want to inhibit the enzyme, remove the substrate, and block further reaction. So now I have a slide that is very complex, but don't worry, I'm going to make it simple. So that's what happened in the oxidoreduction reaction. In juice, that's what we are scared of. A phenol that becomes a quinone starts to be, is very unstable in juice or wine environment. It has to go back to a phenol, so it has to oxidize other polyphenol or even later down the road aromas. That's the same story with an apple. When you cut an apple in two and you see it brown really fast, that's the PPO, polyphenol oxidase, with phenolic compounds that get brown. What happened on the apple or what happened on the avocado is exactly the same as what happened in your juice. You definitely don't want this to happen. Then what happened in wine, so when we finish alcoholic fermentation, is a little bit different. You have oxygen. Oxygen is going to become activated in free radicals by metals. So these are redox reactions. Metals are always present in wine. Even when they are in trace, they can start to activate the oxygen. And the free radicals are going to make the phenols become quinone, same reaction than previously. And you get the browning. But as well, you can oxidize other compounds, not only polyphenol, but aromas. You create H2O2 that can be activated again by these metals, make other free radicals. They oxidize ethanol, become acetaldehyde. So this is actually the Fenton reaction. It's very common. It's very slow reaction. So the juice one is very fast. The wine one is very slow, but it happens. Very important to control it. How do? We can use inert gas or use StabSLI in wine process. So inert gas to protect against the dissolved oxygen. StabSLI is a product that has active lees that will consume the oxygen faster. You can as well use lees aging. Your lees are naturally consuming dissolved oxygen. So you limit the uptake of oxygen into wine. And in juice, you want to remove or inhibit the lacase and the PPO by using antioxidasic tannins, such as tan antibotrytis and tan blanc, or sulfur. Okay, so sorry. So free radicals, you can remove the free radicals. How can you do this? You use some tannins. Enartis develop a tannin that is a tan SLI, is done to scavenge radicals without impacting the mouthfeel. So we use it a lot in rosé and in white wine. We use it during aging, during any transfer if you're scared of any oxygen pickup, and as well at bottling time to protect against any oxygen pickup and further oxidation in the bottle that we would not control. You can remove the phenols, so this is mainly for white wine, but it can as well be done on rosé. Be careful, you don't want to remove too much color, but if you remove these phenols that are precursors of oxidation, you are actually pretty safe and stable. How do you do this? Fining agents. StabSLI contain PVPP, so it can work. PVPP will do a good job, and Clarilachem is a fining agent that will remove as well this phenolic compound. You can trap the quinone, so even if you form the quinone, you make it react with something else before it reacts with the wine compound. How do you do this? Glutathione is able to trap the quinone. So any product that would contain glutathione can be a good antioxidant for this. And you can use ascorbic acid to reduce the quinone back to a phenol. Never use ascorbic acid alone because you will produce H2O2, which becomes strong oxidant. Use only formulation of ascorbic acid that contain SO2. So we have citrostabilization that we use at bottling time, or AST, ascorbic acid sulfur tannin, that we use as an antioxidant on grapes. That would be, AST is probably the most commonly used product on rosé winemaking to control oxidation. You have the tannin that removes the lacase, you have the sulfur that removes free radicals, and you have the ascorbic acid that reduces the quinone in phenol. The last stage that is possible is to actually remove metals. So if you remove metals, so here I'm talking mainly about oxidation in wine. If you remove metals, you actually don't activate the oxygen and you make a wine that is much more stable. So, and this we verified and proved this in many, many samples that we can see that using PVI PVP, it's a compound that is able to chelate metals. So little sister of PVPP, but it's not the same. So it's PVI PVP, and we have Clarilate-HM and ProFT that are actually containing this molecule and will chelate the metal before the metals can activate the oxygen in free radical. So if you stop it here, you stop the reaction for the whole process. So this slide is very complex, but you have everything you need to know about antioxidant reaction. Obviously, the first step is to limit the presence of oxygen and the contact with oxygen. So this was a focus to explain you how to control it from the grape point of view and from the wine point of view. Don't forget that during fermentation, we can go ahead, we are good with oxygen. Post-fermentation, and I'm almost done. Post-fermentation is going to be a very, very short timing. So basically, you finish fermenting in few, let's say, 10 days, and then you now have 2 months to stabilize your wine, do a little bit of aging on lees to work on the mouthfeel, and bottle. So that's where you work on the mouthfeel. You can work with tannins to compensate a lack on structure and length, and you can work on manoprotein or fine lees aging that you keep circulating and keep in suspension in your wine to protect against oxygen, but as well to give this richness and volume that will participate to balance. Stabilization, protein stability, very important. You don't want to make a rosé that is cloudy like this one. You want a rosé clean, clear, that will stay clean and clear through time, especially on the shelf. So you can work during the full process because at this stage, when you're post-fermentation, the only option you have is bentonite. Remember, you can use bentonite during fermentation. You can use fining agent containing bentonite during clarification of the juice. And you can use enzyme with protease activity that can help protein stabilization. Tartaric stability, we are talking about cold stabilization or alternative. So we like to favor alternatives such as CMC Arabic gum, and we have a new one that is not on this slide, but it's Zenith, potassium polyaspartate, brand new molecule that can stabilize any instabilities without destabilizing protein or color. So very, very promising molecule. We are waiting the approval at the FDA in USA, but it's commonly used now in Europe since November last year. So basically, cold stabilization, tartaric stability has to be done. Using cold is not the most qualitative because you're going to lose acidity, you're going to dissolve oxygen, and you are going to usually oxidize all your wine, and you lose time. It takes a good 2 weeks. We are time sensitive, so you want something that you can just add the day of bottling and you're good, and we are oxygen sensitive. I would be interested to know how many people has made rosé and realize that it's all good. The rosé looks beautiful, and then you put it in the bottle, and 2 weeks after the rosé gets brown, and you don't really understand why. And people call it bottle shock, but it's basically the oxygen uptake that you got during your cold stabilization, your transfer of the wine cold. When you are cold, you increase the solubility of oxygen, so you increase the amount of dissolved oxygen you have in your wine. So you make a big saturation, then you warm up your tank, then maybe you take some oxygen during bottling, and done. In the bottle, the wine reacts and gets brown and no more aromas. This is very common. So to avoid this, let's avoid the cold part of the process, and let's use CMC or Arabic gum to stabilize the wine. Obviously, you need to test before because it depends on the initial stability. When Zenith will be approved in USA, you will not even need to test. Zenith, which is potassium polyaspartate, is able to stabilize anything. I'm happy to give you any more information about Zenith after this presentation. Bottling is the last risky step. So we are stable, we are happy with the process. Now we are making the wine to go through bottling. Obviously, filtration is usually highly recommended and needed, since we don't do malolactic in rosé to keep freshness and acidity. You don't want to have a malolactic happening in the bottle. You want to make sure you don't have any dissolved oxygen, and it's a little trick that is very helpful is to work on dissolved CO2. A lot of people like to be right on the edge of the perception threshold of CO2, which is around 1,200 milligrams per liter of dissolved CO2. So that's where you want to be. Usually it pushes the freshness, the aromatics, and it makes the wine more drinkable. Think about the closure, adapt the bottling to the future life of the wine. Think about your free sulfur, how much you are going to put. When are you going to drink this wine? Is it going to be released within next month, or are you going to keep it 6 months before selling it? Your free sulfur is very important for this, to protect against oxidation, but as well to make sure you are not smelling only sulfur. And I think here I have some style of, so it's just a little help on like which style you would like to do and which variety you can work on and which process I would recommend. You are more than welcome to have this presentation and look at this and ask me questions later down the road. But basically you can see that any style, we want to use AST, which is the best antioxidant protection you can have at crusher. Zimarom MP as an enzyme. Then we want a clarification to clean the juice. And then we play with yeast and nutrients. And basically that's it. So thank you very much for your attention. I went a little bit above the time that I was given. So I'm sorry about this. You can send me any question by email here. I put the email of Tyler, which is your contact in Texas. And thank you, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Eglantine. So we still have a little bit of time. We don't have to close this event right now. So if you have any questions for Eglantine, please type them either in the question and answer field or in the chat box. Eglantine, I had a question. You mentioned making rosé through the saignée method, and you mentioned that the biggest downside for that process is the mouthfeel and the balance. Is there any way to mitigate that? If you are making a rosé that way, what's your best option to use?
Completely. So basically, so if we look at this, because it's kind of summarizing all the steps, If we make a saignée, so basically what would be really important is to first not forget the clarification step. So do a good clarification. And then during fermentation, work on manoprotein. So or choose a yeast that will release more manoprotein, or just use a complementary yeast manoprotein, but work on the volume, because you don't have this natural polysaccharide from the grapes that you obtain by pressing. So the idea is you will need to complement on manoprotein even more, because the alcohol level is usually higher. So you feel it's unbalanced. So you need to compensate with this roundness volume to make it bigger. And a little bit of aging. Some people like to use some very light oak to make it more complex and bigger wine. It gives you the polysaccharide of the oak as well, so it could be an option to use some oak chips at this moment.
Thank you. And another question I had with fining, if we use bentonite for fining, do we see loss of color with that?
Of course, there is a loss of color. So, but in the same time, we can't really avoid bentonite since protein has to be stable. The idea is we have to consider that from the color that you will have on your juice and the color after fermentation, without any fining already, you're going to lose a good 30% of this color. And this is just fermentation, yeast, the absorption of the yeast on their leaves, on their cell walls. So you have to plan thinking you are going to do some fining.
Right. Thank you.
Is this answering your
Yes,
question?
Absolutely. Yes. So we have a question here. You mentioned that it is best to start the fermentation warmer to create a fruity, more complex wine, but then to drop the temperature later in fermentation. When would you reduce the temperature and how far?
So, very good question. So yeah, to make more varietal aromas, we usually recommend to have a higher temperature, which was 77, 80 Fahrenheit, not much higher. Then when I say drop the temperature, means we don't really want to stress the yeast, but when you start to be around 1/3 fermentation, when the yeast produce a lot of heat, you want to make sure you control this temperature and you stay around, let's say, 70, 75 Fahrenheit until the end. You don't want to drop it too much because you are going to kill the yeast otherwise, but you don't want to start to lose all your aromas and promote oxidation of them during the end of the fermentation. So 70 Fahrenheit could be a good one.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at this time? No more questions?
I stay available. If there is any question, I'm happy to, you can send them to me by email and I will be happy to answer.
Right, before we end, I would like to ask everybody to please take a minute and fill out the survey at the end of this webinar. And Eglantine, thank you so very much for such an interesting and really helpful presentation. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you everybody for attending, and I hope to see you all next time.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, everybody.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.